Okay. Um, so, when I first started writing on the internet, I was in middle school. Um, I was dumb, didn't know internet protocol, had to make a few shifts. Um, and my very first profile picture on the internet not only used my real name, which is not something you want to do when you're in middle school and have a unique name like mine, um, but also it was the cheesiest, like, most middle school thing ever. It was like two different anime characters, and I'm like, it's two sides of who I am, blah. And my very first fan fiction I ever wrote on there was so conceptually mediocre and executed very poorly. Because there's a RPG I grew up on called Legend of Dragoon. The full title is The Legend of Dragoon, or Legend of the Dragoon, depending on how you read it. But we always call it Legend of Dragoon. Everybody on the internet calls it Legend of Dragoon. It's just what it is. So screw the proper title, I guess. And it's like most people's fan fictions are like really heavy-handed self-insert, right? Like they really just kind of shoehorn themselves into everything and then change the whole story. But I was never a fan of that, because if you're a fan of a story, the last thing you'd want to do is change it unnecessarily. You don't want to make it all about you and change the whole story. You want to keep the structure there and make something that is yours, connected to it. And I would jokingly refer to mine as more like a friggin' an extra digit on the story of Legend of Dragoon. It was that, like, you must have slept with your cousin because you got an extra finger kind of story. It didn't really add anything, but it wasn't terrible either. Especially because at the time I had not actually finished playing the game yet. I was just such a huge fan of it. And I played up to the third disc. I'd finished the third disc, never gotten through the fourth. And that was because there's a particular part in the fourth disc that when I was a kid scared the crap out of me. Like, I would get creeped the frick out from it. And I just couldn't finish it. There were parts in the third disc that had the same kind of creep factor on me when I was a kid, but I'm over it now. But the big thing was that I wrote a story called Legend of the Dragon's Wrath. And I was like, oh yeah, Legend of the Dragon's Wrath. It's like Legend of Dragoon. I'm so smart. And I wasn't. But the whole story was that there was a hidden frickin' eighth member of the Dragoons. Because in that game, there's like 8 elements, right? There's the fire and water, light and dark, wind and earth, and then you've got lightning and non-elemental. And all of the Dragon Power Rangers kind of powers, there were 7 of them, because there's lightning and then there's each of the 3 pairs, but non-elemental wasn't covered. So I thought, like, okay, well, what if there was an 8th Dragoon who... Because there is an 8th Dragoon spirit in there that's non-elemental. I guess hidden other main character is probably the best way to put it, actually. Yeah, not gonna lie. But like, there's the non-elemental, and there is a non-elemental Dragoon spirit in there, but it was like it's like really hyper special, and I didn't want the hyper special. I wanted to give him something that was equivalent to the rest of them. So I made up the Bone Dragon, like almost like the Steel Dragon and the Bone Dragon. Steel dragons are just infant bone dragons. And the Steel Dragon is just, it's unimpressive. It's got gray scales, and he was saved by one of the characters when he was a little kid, because he's a long-lived race called the Winglies. He's one of them. And at first it started out, like, because the character has red hair in the story, and at first I wanted to write it that he was dyeing it red to hide his true heritage, and then I realized, wouldn't it be better if a part of how he got roped into this crap was because he was an outcast from his people because of that condition giving him red hair, and making him look different from the rest of them, mix in some pseudo-racism because the Winglies of his era back in the First War really were racist. That's like, but that was a whole thing. So he was able to blend in with humans because he had different colored hair and didn't look. Yeah, classic racism. Again, I was a kid, but I wasn't dumb. I knew what the tropes were. So he had his life saved, and he tried helping the humans overcome that. But in the final climactic battle, he couldn't turn his back on his people, and he couldn't deal the final blow in that regard. So on the eve of the final battle, he just left. He ran away. And he's been pretending to be somebody else the rest of his time. He went by a different name. He's been a rogue and a thief and sneaking into places, getting by on just, skimming what he can out of stock houses and just disappearing in the background, always on the run from the person that saved his life, because for some reason they're still alive. He can't go home to his species because he doesn't even know who's still alive, and he's not interested in explaining to them where he was during the war. And the one person who saved his life, who's somehow still alive, he doesn't want to interact with them because they're going to ask him why he wasn't there at the final battle. So he's been running for over 11,000 years from his past. And over the course of Legend of Dragon's Wrath, because there's a force called Fate, and it's in quotes, so it's like not just fate in the traditional sense, but like an actual law of the universe kind of fate in the setting, which, by the way, I think putting something like that in quotes is just fairly pretentious. I think that has to have been a dubism. I don't think they put it in quotes in the frickin' Japanese. But anyway, that was conspiring after 11,000 years to rope him back into the events that were going on, and he's still doing everything he can to avoid getting involved. He would arrive at places before the other characters would. Like, there's a boss fight. Like, in the game, you go to this volcano area called Volcano Volute, and the final boss of that is a literal bird made of fire. My story, I made it so that thing was resting peacefully until he accidentally woke it up, and he hid behind a waterfall of lava until it went away, and he didn't think that maybe it might go after somebody else. He's like, nah, please go away, I don't want to be set on fire, thank you very much. And he was literally doing everything he could to dodge responsibility, and I had stopped writing it right about the time he was being forced to face his past. And I had already figured out how I wanted the story to end, but in the part where I stopped is he was about to make his way out of a major city to go back to the ruins of the old arena where everything was. And he was leaving with some guy who is like, back to the classic racism, knew enough about history to like, he's like, I've heard rumors of Winglies about, and I don't want them to come back with their fascism and their racism to try and oppress us humans. And the original idea was this would lead to a conflict where he has to come to face with himself and come back to his Wingly identity and accept that he can't keep running, and then the story would progress. But it ended with him, because he had a pocket watch that I kept talking about the whole series, and I even drew in one of my notebooks that had like water ripples on it, and it had a quote on the inside of it, because all pocket watches in fiction have quotes on the inside of the lid. It says, no matter how big a ripple you make, it eventually has to stop. And the whole big ending I had was he was going to try and confront the final boss before he finalized his plans, and he was going to die in the process. He was going to try and make amends for his failure in the past, and he was going to die there. And when he did, the pocket watch was going to stop clicking. It's going to stop ticking, and it was going to stop with him. And all the interactions he had with characters in the setting was supposed to be like this whole, like, he wasn't really the main character, but he helped to initiate events in the story in the background. And I liked that ending for him, of just somebody who spent their entire life running away from their responsibilities, and then when they step up, finally to accept them, they can die content knowing that they tried. Even if he did nothing in the end, he tried. And I liked that as an ending as a kid. And I keep wanting to revisit it, but by this stage, I have reworked that character so much in my head. Not just how I could do the story better, but also I have a version, because I now that I've writing my own realms, I'm trying to save all my old fanfiction characters in new formats and find homes for them inside existing original settings within my own realm and like rework them accordingly. And I found a place for him, weirdly enough, inside my realm. I think he makes a cameo in one of the side stories on my DeviantArt. But he's a very different character now. Especially because even my understanding of Legend of Dragoon has expanded immensely. I've finished the game like 12 times now, and I have a very different understanding of it than what the game outright tells you to think. And I'd like to think that that was intentional. I'd like to think that the writer of Legend of Dragoon hid the Easter egg in plain sight of what I've come to understand it to be. And guess what? Death of the author, because even if they didn't do it intentionally, I absolutely will still keep believing my interpretation of Legend of Dragoon is accurate. So that's where I'm at with that. But Royal Road is a lot like fanfiction.net. So if except it's like for original fiction. There's even people review swapping and things like that, trying to get each other to read each other's fiction. And the feedback I've gotten on my reviews is interesting. Some of them are like, I'm glad I got this feedback because it lets me know I did it right. I have, again, I tell you, I can't go back and finish it as it was originally intended. I just can't, because I understand the game too much now to work it the way I wanted to do it originally as a kid. But I have reworked it. How much do you know about Legend of Dragoon? Because I don't want to spoil your first run of Legend of Dragoon if you've never played it at all or never heard of it at all. Not much is still enough for me to tell you then. Okay. There's the general premise is that 11,000 years ago, Winglies ruled the world with racism and oppressed humans. When they did that, there's this guy named Emperor Diaz who was the revolutionary that changed everything, and thanks to apparently the god known as Soa, the creator of all things, he realized that you could harvest these crystals called Dragoon spirits, and human beings could tap into them to gain the power of a dragon while using their intelligence and creativity and adaptability to make good use of it. And you had these warriors called the Dragoon. They could train and command dragons. Big ol' fight happens, and the Melbu Frama, the leader of the Winglies, is eventually defeated. And he had been gaining power, because this is the part where it gets weird. The moon in Legend of Dragoon is not an actual moon. Because when Soa created the world, he created the Tree of Life, and each fruit of the Tree of Life gave birth to a different species. There was 107. Humans were the 106th fruit, and the Winglies were the 107th. And the Winglies thought because they were the 107th, that made them better above everybody else. But the moon was the 108th fruit. And the Winglies labeled it as the god of destruction, because it was a being of immense power, and it's where the Virage came from. The Virage are all like proto-embryos of whatever's in the 108th fruit. And so the Winglies were able to get control over the Virages by sealing away the moon, and their leader, Melbu Frama, was able to tap into that power via a crystal ball. But the Winglies, afraid he was going to take all the power, created signets that sealed the moon. So the moon itself is the body, and the crystal ball that he was using to gain power for himself was the soul. They ripped the soul out of the moon, put it in a crystal ball, and then sealed away the body. When Melbu was defeated back in the old days, the crystal ball broke and the soul of the moon escaped, but unable to get back to its body, it started, every 108 years, it would find itself into a human child, and be reborn. And one of the characters, I won't say who, made it their job to kill the Moonchild. That's what it was called. Whenever the soul of the moon was reborn, that was born into the Moonchild, and they kept killing the Moonchild so that way the 108th fruit could never fully mature, and the god of destruction could never come about. But if you look at everything they say about Soa, the character, like the god character, it doesn't make sense that he would create a fruit to just wipe everything out. Especially when you're in the final dungeon, which is the moon. Oddly, the moon seems so helpful. It gives people emotional closure. It gives people, like, all of these things that help heal them and help them focus on the fight ahead. And then when the final boss takes the power of the moon, it goes through, like, the different boss phases, goes through, like, these things that are parallels to the biblical creative days. And I thought about it and I went, if you think about it, the final boss is more of an illustration of Satan than it is, fighting God. Because it's somebody who took the power of God for themselves to serve their own ends. And then I thought more about it. And I thought more. And I thought way too hard about this. And then I realized I could easily rework that old story. So now what we have is somebody who, the main character, his real name is Jihu, but he goes by Enji. That's the pseudonym he's been going by. He now travels the land as a monk of Soa. He's sitting here, he's still a rogue, he still doesn't play by the rules, he still cheats and manipulates, and he's still running away from his past. He doesn't want to meet any of the people who know him, and he is hiding all signs of where he came from. But he's sitting here still believing that Soa had a plan, and that something's off. He was there, he was a Wingly back then, so he was connected to the movers and shakers. He wasn't like important, but he was close to the people who were. Because, that's the other trope of a fanfiction, isn't it? Somehow you're connected to the most powerful people, but that's neither here nor there. But he was close to the people who were. And he thought, he was convinced to participate in this, even though something felt off to him. It didn't make sense that Soa would destroy the world. So, when that power was being abused by Melbu to, oppress humans and everything like that, he couldn't help but get involved in the other side, which ended up with him getting his dragoon spirit and helping the dragoons. But when the final battle came, he couldn't bring himself to fight Melbu, and he couldn't bring himself to fight his fellow dragoons. So he trusted in Soa's plan. He trusted that whatever fate was Soa intended, especially with somebody like Emperor Diaz, who came up with using the Dragoon Spirits in the first place, whatever that intention was, he was going to leave it in Soa's hands. And he left, because he couldn't participate. He didn't think his people deserved to be wiped out, but he also knew that Melbu could not be allowed to continue. So we fast forward 11,000 years. He's been posing himself as a monk, traveling from continent to continent until people forget he's there, and never returning home. Not really. He would go in through his own little back roads into his old house, but he has not made himself known to his people, and he's wandered around trying to figure out what's going on. He's been following the death of he's been following the birth of every Moonchild, and been avoiding when the killing would start. He'd always bail out. But he was always following it, trying to understand what was going on, trying to study the Moonchild for a better understanding of what Soa was trying to do. And over the course of the story, I was going to have him find himself getting roped back into the mindset that, Soa's plan needs to come to fruition. The Moonchild must be born and be returned to the moon. And as he's going through this, and yes, he's still in the background, pushing things here, pushing things there, he's slowly coming to his own conclusion that, there are people here who are they're so convinced that this power that's so great was designed for destruction. And he can't accept that. There's something about it that seems so much more benevolent. And so it's his conviction that it's the reason it needed to have this much power was so that it could help everybody so it can fulfill the wishes. So what he does in the background is, towards the end of the story, he continues his exile in a sense, because he's not going to shift from what he believes to be true, but he finds a way to spare the current Moonchild from having to continue to suffer through that process, and harvests that soul back, the soul of the moon back, and has it born eventually into his own child. And there was going to be a follow-up fic after that, following his 2 daughters, one of which contains the soul of the moon that doesn't exist anymore because it was blown up. Don't ask. Don't ask. Just play the game. Just play it. It's fine. But the moon is no more, and the soul of the moon is one of his kids. And the struggle as that kid tries to realize their destiny and so his plan, while the God of Destruction narrative keeps getting thrown around. So they're being labeled as the Antichrist, for lack of a better explanation. They are being labeled as a mobile apocalypse, while their only goal and intention is to bring peace, to help people. And in order to do that, they need to gather what they can of the broken pieces of the moon and realize their full potential there, and like get their power that they need to have in order to bring peace. So it was like a conflict not only of ideals, but between siblings that were both wanting to fulfill their purpose. Because one of them, the sibling that isn't the Moonchild, becomes a Dragoon, a protector of the world. They believe themselves destined to be somebody who protects the world. And the Dragoons, in their mind, is the natural enemy of the Moonchild, because that's the Moonchild's the God of Destruction, right? It just makes sense. And so to have it be her own sister is a bit much, especially when you have Dad picking a favorite, being the Moonchild one, because he spends more time with her, and she seems so demure and so kind. You want to just prove yourself and your worth, and it's not that simple. And I was going to do lots of callbacks to little bits and pieces throughout the series, as I followed up with all the children of the classic team, as well as members of the classic team that would still be alive during that time. 'Cause it's only about 20, maybe 30 years after the end of the series. So a lot of them would still be alive. And so I really liked that duo of stories. The first one just revisiting the concept and having him kind of be my whole, let him be the voice of the author there, and kind of give voice and weight to my conspiracy theory as to the real message of Legend of Dragoon. And also have that follow-up series, because I know it's a horrid trope, right? It is overdone and always done cheesily, but the Next Generation trope is like one of my favorites, where you take the kids of all the previous heroes and like you create, weirdly enough, even though some of these heroes obviously end up paired off with each other, you just happen to have enough collection of these children and students of the previous generation to make exactly the same number. And they all have unique personalities, but also they are basically just variations on the original generation. I like it as a trope. It's so endearing. It's not perfect, but it's so frickin' cute. Because one of my characters in there, because one of the characters in the games is made fun of so much because they're not good in combat. They're not good in combat because they use a bow, which means they can't combo or anything like everybody else. But in my setting, I wanted to have their kid have like an arm-mounted crossbow that's like has multiple like arrows in it, and it's like medieval style explosive arrows. So it's got like bags of gunpowder with fuses attached to them, and all those kinds of shenanigans. It's like green arrows, trick arrows without any modern tech. And she was supposed to be like this, basically the inciting incident for everything. Because she just hears about this stuff and then gets herself involved and makes everything worse. She even drags people along with her. She is like literally which connects me back a little bit to the fanfiction.net logo. My original fanfiction.net avatar had Sasuke Uchiha on one side and Lina Inverse on the other, because back then I was a very mopey, like depressed, angry teen like Sasuke, but I also had this hot gremlin energy about me of just like, but frick it, nuke the world, man. And so I figured the two halves of me were Sasuke Uchiha and Lina Inverse. And do you know what? If I had to pick characters that embody me even now that I'm older, I mean, I've seen Boruto Sasuke, and Boruto Sasuke is not actually that far from half of who I am, I'm not gonna lie. That kind of like, that quiet old man energy. Not the angry old man energy, it's quiet old man energy. It's hard to tell on a stream like this, but you heard me earlier, I was getting real quiet while I was writing. But yeah, everyone, why I like the next generation trope for me is because I to deal with your thing words, is like I want relationships within a story to mean something, and I think the pinnacle of character chemistry is kind of seeing what their kids become, because everybody's kids is like a blend between the two parents, but they're also their own beast because of it. There's that blending, that mesh of genetics plus the upbringing creates a fresh new perspective. There's enough there to be recognized, and yet there is so much uniqueness in that chemistry. Because even when I look at my own parents, I take after both of them in equal measures. But it's weird how some of the ways in which I take after them in equal measures create interesting chemistry. Like my dad's very much wanting to be in the spotlight, wanting to be gregarious in the life of the party, even though he can't really connect with people very well. It's not really a strong suit. He doesn't read people very well. And me, I am a social recluse. I prefer not to be in the spotlight. But if I'm gonna be in the spotlight, I want to have fun doing it, and I want the people around me to have fun as I'm having fun. I want everybody to enjoy themselves. If I'm going to host a party, I'm gonna show up as Steampunk Willy Wonka. I'm gonna have the coolest music going on, and I'm gonna be checking on all my party guests because I want everybody to enjoy themselves. But when the party's over, I will be exhausted and I will pass out on my bed, and I will ask nobody to talk to me for days, but you know what? At least I'll know everybody had fun. And that's my goal. Even when I'm writing my stories, I want everybody who reads my story to enjoy themselves. I want them to be able to, I wouldn't say resonate exactly, though it is a good word for it. It's not quite right. I want everybody to be able to find something to love in my work. Even if it's not what I intended, I want people to find something that brings them joy and ignites their passion. I just realized I'm still recording, but that's fine. I can put this up. I'll put this up with other recordings.